Okay, I think we've got a quorum here. Thanks, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good day, whatever your time zone is. It's fun to see where everybody's coming from. It looks like we have a good range of folks, a bunch of people from New York City, which is cool, and a lot of other folks from other places around this country and Canada. So thanks for joining us today. I'm guessing that we're going to keep having folks file in. That's great, but we got a lot of stuff we want to talk about, so we're going to get started. So first, thank you all for joining today. I'm Raj Kodamasu. I'm a senior principal for design and strategy at the Public Policy Lab. And joining me today is Jamie Stock, who's a fellow on our team. Jamie's going to be introducing PPL in a second, and then also managing our chat and helping with some of the logistics today. But today we are here to talk about co-designing to build capital. Before we get into that meat of what we're going to be talking about, Jamie, would you mind sharing a little bit of context about the Public Policy Lab?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Raj. So the Public Policy Lab is a nonprofit organization based in New York City. We are located right at the end of this little arrow in Dumbo. And we believe that we were the first nonprofit established in the US to do human-centered policy design, specifically with and for Americans. So we've been around since 2011, and we partner with government and NGOs to improve service delivery systems and the policies that enable those systems. And we generally focus on the experiences of low income and often marginalized communities. Our work tends to fall into two bigger buckets. So the first is service design, and that means that we design all of the components of a service that a public agency might offer. And so that can be like human interactions, digital tools, print artifacts, and then the underlying systems as well. So all of the components of a given system that are going to unfold over time when a member of the public interacts with them. And we also do policy design. So that's thinking about the policies that actually feed into all of those services. And so if we're trying to change the way the public interacts with the service, we might have to go under the hood and design the way the underlying policy is shaped. And we can do that using a design-centered approach as well. And then in the course of doing these two really big idea buckets of work, we're doing lots of other types of things as well. And that's where these four things on the bottom come into play. So product design, that's print products, digital products, any sort of collateral that allows a service to be delivered. We also really engage in a lot of change management. That's really at the heart of what we do because what we are doing often requires change in really huge systems, which we know can be really slow and difficult. And so it's important that we have intentional strategies to negotiate and facilitate that change all throughout our projects, because otherwise they're just not going to be successful. Research and evaluation happens at the start of the project, informing what we're designing, as well as helping us along the way to assess the impact of what we've made once we're further along. And then finally, community engagement is really at the core of all of our work and is happening throughout all of our projects. And we're getting inputs for our process and informing our change management strategies as well by engaging with folks, often through ethnographic methods. So over the past decade and a half, we've partnered with dozens of agencies, philanthropic organizations, and institutions across the country. And we've conducted research with residents in almost all 50 US states. And our work is focused on improving public services across really 6 key areas. So children and families, we do a lot of work with New York City agencies focused on their well-being. Education, we don't really do curriculum focused work, more the administration of educational programs and also sort of seeing schools as a really important place of service delivery for other programs. And then health and accessibility, we work with a variety of government health agencies as well as within health systems. Housing and homelessness, where we've worked with agencies both at the New York City and the federal level. We've done work with justice and violence partners at both city and state levels. And we've also done a lot of work with veterans, specifically with the VA, including help set up the Veterans Experience Office at the VA, which was at the time, the first of its kind. So now that you know a little bit about PPL, let's talk about our goals for today. So what we're hoping to do today is to stimulate your consideration of the value and impact of co-design, specifically how it can build capital in the context of public services. So as we go through it, you might think about where this might fit into your own work and where co-design could help you build capacity or connections. So here's a quick look at what we will cover today. First, we'll talk about why we're focusing on the idea of building capital and what that means in the context of public services. After that, we'll dig into what co-design actually is and how it connects to this idea of building capital. And then we'll spend more than half of the time actually walking through a case study that shows what these ideas look like in practice. Finally, we will leave time at the end for your questions and discussion. And so as we go through, feel free to jot down anything that sparks your curiosity or that you'd like to circle back at on during the Q&A. And you can use the Q&A function to do that, and that'll just make it a little bit easier for us to make sure that we answer as many questions as possible. So now I will hand it back to Raj to take us through all of what we just spoke about.
Thanks, Jamie. Okay, so this is what we're here to talk about today. Capital building through co-design. So first, why focus on building capital? An important thing to today's conversation is that at PPL, our work tends to focus on human-centered innovation in the design of policy and services aimed at supporting Americans. That's just what Jamie sort of talked you through. But I'm going to spend a little bit more time unpacking that. So this is to say that our project work is predominantly focused on the design of services that members of the public receive, the many touch points and encounters they have with service providers, information products, systems, digital interfaces, spaces, all of these things that make up the receipt of given services. Or we're focused on the design of the policies that are undergirding and informing delivery of those services. So here are two projects that we've worked on recently as examples. So this one, rental assistance through people-informed design. This was a project that we did in partnership with the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development. And here we focused on improving the city's housing choice voucher experience for tenants, owners, and staff, with a particular focus on facilitating more low-income families, older adults, veterans, people with disabilities accessing affordable housing in the private market. And then this project with the New York City Administration for Children's Services and the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, we worked on this project, Family Pathways to Care, which focused on a challenge in connecting families to mental health and therapeutic support services. And here we researched how families currently connect with and experience those services, and then we developed strategies alongside families and staff members and leaders, strategies to expand access, to support more cross-system referral pathways, to improve family experience, and to create sustainable feedback channels for families and providers' voices to be heard. And these are both great and interesting projects. I'm doing them total disservice right now by encapsulating them so briefly, but you can read more about both of them and all of our other projects on our website, which is publicpolicylab.org. We have case studies of every project that we've undertaken. And what both of these projects do, and the reason that I wanted to talk about those specific projects to sort of talk them through a little bit more, is that they demonstrate that in our portfolio, we're often responding to a gap in service or support for a particular segment of the public that either we or a government or a philanthropic partner has identified. Right, so some people are not being served by this thing, like the families that weren't receiving support services. And then we conduct a bunch of design research with the various people who aim to deliver those services and also the folks who are intended to benefit from those services or policies or programs. And then we lead a collaborative design process, a co-design process, that's what we're talking about today, to conceptualize, prototype, and refine some set of policies or programs or interventions to address that previously unmet need or opportunity. And then we pilot and redesign and eventually scale some set of interventions. And that's our project process in a really tight little nutshell. And it can be easy in this context to see every problem in a similar way. There are services or programs that don't quite yet, or at this particular moment, they're not meeting their intended beneficiaries, and there's an opportunity to serve those people better. Or there's new services or programs that need to be designed for public benefit that require public uptake, and we just want to make sure we're connecting with all of the right people so that they access that new service or program. And in either case, it's that we see a hole and we go in and we work to sew up that hole so more people get that public support. And that is a great portfolio of work. We're very grateful to have had such opportunities, and it's actually really challenging and exciting work to do. But there is another type of problem that nags at a lot of public servants, which is how can we reduce people's need for a given public service? How can we build people's individual capacity and resources so they eventually don't need to rely on public support? And this is an especially relevant question in a context in which public dollars, at least at the federal level, are diminishing, and public services are being streamlined or cut or made more difficult to access. How do we make the most strategic impact on people's lives without building reliance on public support that might be increasingly finite or unreliable? This is a type of question we haven't come across as often at PPL. As Jamie noted, we've been around for 15 years. Those have been really productive and generative years, but those types of questions haven't come across our plate as often. It's certainly something that others have explored through things like micro-granting initiatives or universal basic income pilots or free or subsidized housing programs, which go back as far, at least, as the GI Bill, that work to help to end housing instability and homelessness by providing people subsidized or affordable housing. So the question is, where can the investment be most strategic so that it addresses the root cause of the problem that we're otherwise going to constantly be triaging? And this is an exciting question for researchers and designers, and I'm guessing for many of you, that's why you're here, because it allows us to think systemically and to design for the impact behind the impact. But it also poses challenges. How do we identify the right root causes to address? And how do we clear the brush of the acute situation to be able to trace back to the most impactful, or more importantly, the most actionable source of the acute situation? Because sometimes that source is something really gnarly, like racism or inequity, hundreds of years of history and culture that's really hard to tackle. How do you get a handhold there to be able to take a hacksaw to it? So we don't have like a total solution here, but in the US, all of these gnarly topics, they intersect with capital, and capital is addressable with money and resources. So let's go there. What if public programs were designed to build capital? And here we don't just mean financial capital, although that matters, but also the social networks, the knowledge, confidence, institutional know-how, all of these different things that enable people to convert opportunity into sustained prosperity. Capital comes in a lot of different forms. From some of the early draft work in the project that we're going to be discussing today, here are 12 categories of capital to consider, and they offer a sense of the breadth and depth of what's at play. And Jamie, actually, if you wouldn't mind, in the notes for this slide, there's a link to an article that's published by our senior fellow who was on this project, Julia Adams, about these capitals, if you want to read more about them. So, you know what, I'll just linger there for a second, just to say that there are these larger three types that Juliet identified anyway: tangible capital, social capital, individual capital, just arraying those different things. I just wanted to make sure that everybody got a moment to sort of look at this and contemplate, like, what are the different types of capitals we're talking about? So with that in mind, I'll ask this question again. What if public programs were designed to build capital? From our perspective, that's a move from a shift in approach from serving the public to strengthening the public. And so first, why would we do this? Why is capital building a smart public investment? Well, first, because capital endures and compounds. Relief is temporary. Because capital building turns beneficiaries into co-producers of public value, which reduces long-term dependency. Because diverse forms of capital buffer individuals from shocks and build resilience to hardship. Because capital frees people up to be more creative and productive and future-oriented. And because it shows lasting return on investment, evidence from fields like microenterprise or homeownership policy, education savings, all those precedents that we talked about, they all show lasting return on investment. And so that's part of what we're here to talk about today, is a focus on building capital. But maybe I'm telling you things that you all already know. You're already on this page. You are really into universal basic income. You're free housing advocates. This is not a new concept for you. And that's fine. We're here to also just sort of participate in this dialogue. But the other component that we want to discuss here is co-design, which also isn't new, and maybe you know a lot about that too, but we think that this combination of co-design and capital building is something worth discussing because it's two things that we haven't put together in such a official or a more explicit way before. But first, let's get on the same page. What is co-design? We're going to do a quick Zoom poll to get a sense of people's familiarity with it. Jamie, can you send out that poll? Great. So if folks can just fill out this poll, it's a really quick one. How familiar are you with co-design? So 0 is not at all familiar. 5 is very familiar. In the middle is like, yeah, I dabbled. Great. Looks like everybody has responded here. It actually looks like you all are pretty well versed in co-design. If we, Jamie, I don't know if you want to end that poll and then everybody can see. Looks like folks actually have a lot of good experience co-design. At least everybody's sort of heard of it. There are a couple of folks who haven't yet. That's great. I'm not going to go advanced here so that we all stay in the same conversation, but it's valuable to know that there's a lot of folks who have experience with it. So thanks for that. So just so again, so we're on the same page and I know that we're talking about the same thing. What is co-design? Co-design is a collaborative approach to designing products, services, and policies in which stakeholders, which include both service providers and end users, members of the public in our case, actively participate in the design process. I'm also curious, because there are so many folks who have some experience with co-design, if you're as you sort of follow along and you hear me talking about it, if there's more color that you want to offer or alternate ways that you talk about it, please put those in the chat. I think that that's interesting as well. In our process and PPL's model, co-design happens here after conducting and synthesizing research insights. And the goal of co-design is to co-create viable prototypes, which is to say initial models or examples of new policies and services, products, whatever it is that we're making, where you are making those things alongside and in collaboration with the people who are going to use them and the people who are going to deliver them. Say you were aiming to create one of these things, right? A mental model, a new mental model of how to think about something. That's what you're trying to create. Or a service model. How does something get delivered? How does a service get delivered? A workflow process, training materials, communication materials, information materials, data collection forms. These could be anything. These are, we might be designing a whole variety of these things at the same time. To get there in a co-design process, we might start by creating and testing low fidelity prototypes with our co-designers, things like mock-ups, paper or low tech analogs, storyboards, models, role play, prioritization exercises, sample advertisements, things that don't take a long time to make so that we can get to the point of let's play with them. And that helps you to figure out answers to foundational open questions about your idea to inform future development of the idea without actually having to build everything out because you don't know if you're building out the right thing. And then as you get clearer on what the right thing might be, some of these foundational questions you start to answer, and you might start making more refined prototypes of the thing that you're making, iteratively redesigning prototypes of increasing degrees of fidelity, moving from lo-fi to something more polished. And so then you might get to things like these on this list, a set of high fidelity prototypes, full drafts, codified processes, like a process map, a video, a draft or a produced video, a clickable interface, a new role definition. And even then, you've got these higher fidelity things, and maybe now you're refining more than you are sort of asking foundational questions, but you're still testing these, you're still refining these with your co-designers. And so that's a lot of steps that are involved in that, a lot of iteration, a lot of collaboration. What are the benefits of undertaking all of that work? So first, there's greater relevance and fit. Co-design participants can help reframe the challenge and define success from their perspective. And then solutions can actually work in the real world context that they're meant for. Reduced risk and rework. Early input helps identify your blind spots, which helps you lead to more resilient solutions, which can prevent costly failures or redesign down the line. adoption and engagement involving early users uncovers their habits and their values and their barriers. And then you're designing for those things, which results in solutions that are more usable and desirable and aligned with what people are actually, what they need. And then people are more likely to use and support and advocate for what they helped to create as well. Equity and inclusion, co-design helps ensure that solutions are culturally responsive and directly address the unique challenges that particular groups face, to support dismantling systemic barriers, reducing stigma, promoting inclusivity. Trust and relationship building, by treating people as partners, not passive recipients. You build trust, transparency, long-term relationships. Co-design can shift power dynamics and help to rebuild credibility where it has faltered. And these are all reasons we co-design in almost every project in which we design things at PPL. It makes the outputs better. But beyond those benefits, it just makes sense to do co-design as a way to help build people's capital, because co-design is capital building. It confers capital to the people who participate in it. When communities are engaged as co-creators, it honors and elevates the experience and expertise they have and allows them to articulate and codify that experience into something that directly generates value. It builds their shared ownership of an asset, the thing that you are designing together. It gives them shared authorship of something that offers community benefit, which comes with things like prestige or connection or credibility or pride. It builds their skills and capacities to sustain a given solution, as well as to develop or adapt further solutions over time, right? We're empowering them with ways of thinking about how to solve problems. They're gaining and cultivating skills so that they can apply in other places. And then also that experience can inspire them toward another undertaking, whether that's with us or independent of us. So what does it look like to conduct co-design to build capital? We're going to turn to a case study of a recently completed project to talk it through. We'll spend most of the rest of our time together on this case study, which is called the Compass Pilot. This was work that PPL undertook for over a year and a half with the support of the National Science Foundation. The project was terminated under current federal leadership, but we were able to almost entirely complete it before its termination. Regardless, this was initially a project focused on federal seed funding, which is offered by the NSF as well as various other federal agencies. The NSF in particular awards seed funding grants for science and technology innovation around all across the country. These have historically been big grants up to millions of dollars aimed at supporting early stage science and technology innovation, with a particular focus on innovations that have social impact. But in this case, the pool of grantees has historically skewed toward recipients who already have many types of capital, right? They live in urban centers with access to many peers and collaborators. They have degrees from prestigious universities. They have affiliations with big institutions. They have histories of existing federal grants or other types of grants. So our task was to learn more about the other innovators in undercapitalized communities without all of those assets, and to identify ways to better support them so they might be able to successfully seek federal seed funding. This remit was not specifically about building capital at this point, but just how do we get these folks to be able to get this seed funding? And so we read it more like a typical PPL project, like I talked about before. A group of people were not sufficiently able to benefit from a public service. So how might we enable them to more readily access that service? There was an arduous application process involved. And so we hypothesized that might be the place for intervention to better support the application experience. We have a lot of experience in helping to redesign application experiences. Our work always begins with design research, qualitative research with the populations of focus to be able to glean insights around their needs and the opportunities to design something that can serve them. So that's what we did here with innovators and mentors and subject matter experts. To start our research, we needed to connect with innovators, and we recruited them through innovator support organizations and through mentors, through PPL's website, through social media. Also a press release that the NSF put out for the project. And in recruiting them, we sought a range of racial and ethnic identities that were underrepresented statistically in federal seed funding, a range of locations, innovators based in non-coastal cities and rural communities and economically disadvantaged urban areas, people with different experience with federal funding, innovators who had not previously applied for or received seed funding from a government agency, as well as some who had. And then stage of business. So we were looking for innovators leading early stage startups with 1 to 5 team members and generating less than $200,000 in revenue. So among other things, we learned that undercapitalized innovators especially these are the things that we learned from our research with them. They need clear, plain language information and resources. They need insights into their gaps and practical strategies to address them. They need recognition of the real obstacles they face. That includes basics like personal finances, geographic isolation, lack of mentorship, things like that. They need models of success they can actually relate to, right? Things that represent their stories, their paths, things that seem relatable to them. They need connections to mentor and support organizations that align with their values. And they need validation that they belong to the innovation community. And then they need enough cushion to experiment, take risks, fail, and learn, because when resources are limited, every decision can feel like it's high stakes, and that makes you much more conservative. So we were initially inclined to focus on redesigning the application process, again, because that's a space that we're accustomed to, seeing a gap in a public program's ability to connect with a given population and designing a new process to engage them. So we were thinking, we can improve this application process for underrepresented folks, whether they are at universities or not, whether they have PhDs or don't, and we can make it easier to apply for these grants. And that would have been a great project, but our NSF partners let us know, actually, there's a lot of work being done in that area already. So you might want to look at some of that work. And in reviewing some of that work, we decided to focus further upstream on what might enable early stage innovators, people who might not have even been thinking about applying to federal grants, what might enable them to advance their science and technology ventures toward eventual fundability and successful launch. Specifically, helping those early stage innovators identify the types of capital that they need in order to thrive, and then offering them support to close any related gaps. So looking all the way upstream before they're even thinking about funding to just sort of strengthen them as early stage innovators. So now let's move to co-design. We assembled a group of 15 innovators from our initial recruitment to work with us remotely for 5 months in co-design. Each innovator received a micro grant of $25,000 to advance their innovation, which complemented the capital that they were gaining through participating in co-design. We started co-design with a handful of preliminary concepts that these innovators helped us to weed through and refine and iterate. So key among those preliminary concepts were these 3, which you're going to hear me mention again later. So first, an innovation primer that would help innovators understand the requirements and rationale for each step in navigating the innovation ecosystem and help them to see the value of investing their time in the process. So this primer would clearly explain the capitals needed to succeed as an innovator. Next is a quiz or an assessment tool for innovators as well as support organizations to evaluate an innovator's readiness to pursue funding against different types of capital necessary for success. So the tool would assess innovators' assets and their roadblocks and identify support organizations that could assist in addressing some of their gaps. And then last, innovator resources, tools to help innovators build or acquire the capitals that they need to succeed. So like I said, this was a 5-month process. We held 10 2-hour co-design workshops on Zoom over 20 weeks, plus a handful of additional smaller engagements. You can see here, I'm not going to pour through these, but you can see all of the high-level goals of the 10 sessions, which evolved week over week. from reviewing and gathering feedback to sharing an MVP platform and getting final feedback. So you can see that we really built up over the course of this. We crafted activities, pardon me, crafted activities where innovators mapped out their personal innovation journeys, provided critical feedback on prototypes and design directions, and helped us refine a central innovation framework within which all the other ideas could sit. They also helped us to decide, about 6 sessions in, that what we needed to be designing was a website. We had not decided that before. We had a variety of, we were open to any format that those concepts might formulate. We thought maybe they were separate pieces, but we got to a place in co-design where the innovators helped us decide, actually, if this were a web platform, all of these pieces could integrate here, and it could be the most accessible to the farthest reaching population of these early stage innovators. So just to take a look at where we started, let's take a look at session 4, where here's our goal: identify shared setbacks and aids during the innovation journey. I'm just going to show you some screens that are screenshots of our different digital workspaces for these co-design sessions. So here, this is session 4. We were thinking about the innovation primer and how we might help early innovators understand the innovation journey that they're about to take. So we started by asking our co-design cohort to map out their journeys. And here's an example. We asked them to name the steps and identify the assets and the resources they had at each step and the things they lacked at each step. Those sort of correspond with some of the colors that you're seeing in these post-its between the start and today. And then we took that whole mess of journeys, that all of those different innovator journeys, we took them together and we tried to consolidate them into some prototypical journey maps to get to some universal sense of an innovator journey. Because that's what we heard that's one of the things we heard in research that early innovators wanted. They wanted some sense of what they were in for. What are the steps that they needed to take? And then we presented this back to the innovators that we were co-designing with. And we showed them these composite journey maps. And they said, you know what? No, actually, I took a journey, but there isn't really a linear set of steps that's the same for everyone. Like I went back and forth between a bunch of things. I stopped here, I started again, and somebody else doesn't have to do that. They could also start at this other step. So this really shouldn't be a linear path. It should just be categories of activities that you can undertake. So we said, okay, we'll try that. So in a subsequent session, we tried clustering those activities by categories instead of sequence. This is just an example to show you how we refined the fundamental way that we constructed and framed the information that we were going to communicate out ultimately. And we did that through this process of iterative development with the population that we were trying to serve, so it could be as relevant as possible to them. In this case, these weren't even the categories that we landed on. We continued to do a lot more refinement and iteration with them. They said, this isn't really the right category or categorization. This thing doesn't really belong here either. And maybe these are all actually the same thing. So they helped us to reorganize these quite a bit. And ultimately, what we developed was 3 major categories of activities: entrepreneurship, impact, and community. And then we sorted all of the activities into those 3 categories. And so then together, over those 20 weeks, we leveraged the needs that were expressed during research, and we leveraged the design concepts that were developed in co-design, and we developed a web platform to support early stage innovators in their development. And at this point, at the end of co-design, this is only an MVP, a minimum viable product. It's a basic version of a web platform to allow us to gather feedback from early users and to validate their needs and wishes before we made the commitment of time and resources to develop a more fully featured product, or recommended that set of resources be allocated. So we called this MVP Innovation Compass, which makes reference to its key ambition, which is helping early stage innovators seek direction and successfully navigate towards success and funding. And the platform had these major components. First, there are building blocks, 12 foundational focus areas that capture what innovators need to be successful in the innovation ecosystem. And like I said before, with these building blocks, we started out with the list of capitals that our senior fellow, Juliet Adams, had started with. She had drafted that list, that sort of array of capitals based on her research and her expertise in technology and also in academia. And that was a strong starting place. But when we shared those with the innovators, they didn't really connect with that framing of capitals. They helped us to refine and redefine these things as building blocks that are most essential to their success. And then they also helped us to sort of change what some of the language was, change some of those groupings. So that took it from something that comes from a more academic space to something that comes from lived experience, or that hybridizes those two things. Next, there were the practices, 40 practices, steps to take in your innovation journey, categorized by those building blocks that innovators uh, can then pursue to advance their business. And this is what the innovation primer ultimately turned into, a series of categorized steps. These were also identified and delineated in partnership with the innovators. There are resources, 200 vetted materials that have been proven effective for innovators and innovator support professionals. So we sourced these from the innovators, as well as from an advisory committee of other innovators who are further along in their journey, as well as innovator support organizations. And then we vetted them with the innovators again to see like which ones of these actually feel relevant to you, which ones are missing, what types of resources do we need to complement these with. The Compass quiz, which is a structured and user-friendly self-assessment that helps early-stage innovators identify the strengths that they already have, as well as their gaps, and prioritize focus on particular building blocks and practices. So we went in with an idea of this. I talked to you about it at the beginning of when we were talking about co-design, but it was really refined and made much more useful through co-design. And then a couple of features that we hadn't conceptualized at the outset. Innovator Stories, a collection of real innovator profiles offering valuable insights into the challenges and inspirations experienced when trying to grow a venture. In fact, on the platform, these were actually the stories of 3 of our innovators from the co-design cohort. Our co-designers really felt they really wanted to share these stories and have a place to reflect on other people's stories, other innovators' stories. So this is a feature that they really encouraged us to add. And then another one is the glossary, definitions of technical jargon in plain and culturally relevant language to ensure clarity and understanding for all innovators who were making use of the platform. Our co-designers also really pushed for this and helped us to identify what terms to include here and helped us to refine the way that we were defining them and making sense of them. Now I'm going to tell you what happened after co-design, just so we can finish the story and talk about what the impact was that we think co-design had on the outcome of this work. So over 3 months in late 2024, early 2025, we piloted this MVP Innovation Compass platform with 25 early stage and undercapitalized innovators. This was not the same group that we had done co-design with because we wanted to test with people who were not familiar with or attached to the platform already. And we also wanted to move even earlier in the innovator journey, connecting with folks who were even more unconnected to innovation resources. And in this case, the pilot, each participant received a $20,000 micro grant to support their learning development in tandem with their use of the platform and the capital that they were developing through using the platform. And we also engaged a handful of mentors and a group of innovator support organizations, which we also shortened to ISOs, so that they could test and provide feedback on their potential use of the platform and its components. I'm not going to focus as much on how we ran the pilot because we're focused more here on co-design, but I'm going to just say that we learned about the experiences of our pilot cohort in using the platform through a bunch of different methods. We did user testing, we conducted interviews with them, we did surveys, examined their quiz results. We asked them to take the quiz at 3 different points over the course of the pilot to see how they were building those capacities. We reviewed weekly logs that they wrote up. They added comments to the site directly. We looked at Google Analytics. There's all kinds of ways that we were trying to learn from them. And their response to the site was overwhelmingly positive. Innovators in the cohort found it, super useful. Of particular value to them were the consolidated resources, over 200 resources recommended by innovators and subject matter experts that were all in one place, which helped to make their journeys feel more directed, organized, efficient. The Compass quiz, which helped them assess their strengths and opportunities for growth and help them identify and tackle priority areas. The building blocks framework, which helps them develop their ventures, not just in the domain of entrepreneurship, but also in the domains of impact and community. And because that well-roundedness is actually very attractive to a lot of funders, including the NSF, that they really prioritize thinking not just about entrepreneurship, but these other sort of social level impacts and considerations. The glossary of innovation jargon, they said it really helped them to level up and navigate a context that might otherwise be alienating or make them feel like an outsider. Overall, they found the comprehensive platform really useful to their development journey. And I want to reiterate for you that these were a different group of people than the people who had designed this. So we designed with a group of innovators, and we tested with another group of innovators who validated a lot of the things that that first group had really prioritized and helped us to refine. And I mentioned the Compass quiz, the assessment tool. We had all of the innovators in the pilot cohort take the quiz 3 times during the pilot. It measures their preparedness to successfully launch a venture. By the end of the pilot, every one of the innovators that we tested with showed a notable increase in the results on that quiz. So again, we took that as a measure of their own capital building through the participation, the use of the pilot. I want to play some clips of them actually talking instead of me, and I'll drink some water, but let's listen to what they said.
So there are things that I thought I knew that I learned more about. And then there are things where like initially I'm like, well, it's a little early to consider company culture. But then like, not really, because in very short order, we're talking about like hiring 2 or 3 people. So I would say that it helps you understand what you already know you need to know, and it helps you identify what you don't know you need to know.
Having a one-stop shop, a centralized place where I can go as an innovator to not just get guidance and tips and resources, for my journey as an entrepreneur, just have it being tailored to my journey, being able to take the quiz, being able to engage with those practices and building blocks I feel like, okay, are most relevant to me in the moment. And one thing that I found very interesting was like, as time went on, like, I found, one building block, more like influential, like that right then and there versus like other ones I'd engaged with in the past. So it's just like really cool to be able to like go there and just have everything be centralized like that and having resources at my fingertips.
You all use real people and they have real experiences, and I felt like the understanding and relatability was there. Relatability builds trust. Does these platforms have my best interests in mind? So are you looking at it from my angle as a business owner who is, going through the different stages of business? And then also, are you creating tailored resources? So when you have people who are going through this process, who is building it, I feel like there is better curation, and that's something that I could tell, even from the practices.
If everybody used this platform, like the difference it would make in their accelerator, because they think they know, but it's really just based on like one person just thinking they know what's best. And whereas this is a lot of people that have come together and have collaborated on this, the benefit that accelerators could have by partnering with you guys and incorporating this into their accelerator, I think that they would see a lot more success.
So those are all really nice things. Those are great for us to hear because that was very validating. But we also got a lot of like critical feedback about the site's features, and then we iterated the site's design in response. We have now launched the site at innovationcompass.io. Jamie, if you can put that in the chat, please check it out. It is a live site. We're not updating it currently, but it is available. The platform's code and its components are publicly available under a Creative Commons license, so organizations can adapt and build on them freely. We're not trying to hold this as a thing that we have to administer. We want to share it so other people can make use of it. A note on that, and a note on implementation and scaling Innovation Compass. When we reframed our goal, we had decided to focus our intervention upstream of the application process for federal seed funding, so we could target a richer root cause of underrepresentation in the grant-making pool. Just aiming at building people's capacity regardless of their participation in a government program or service, which is great. And we feel like that was the right place for us to land. But it also meant that the intervention cannot easily be adopted by the NSF or other federal agencies. So that's a little bit of a stumbling block for that focus. But we'd also understood from the beginning that the strongest support intermediary between innovators and funding opportunities are these innovator support organizations, or ISOs. And we had interviewed people working in these organizations as part of our research, and we'd engaged them through our advisory committee. We had trialed the platform with them during the pilot to better understand their potential use of Innovation Compass and its components. And so they seem like the ideal implementation partners for what we ultimately developed, even though we didn't go in with that concept. So as we continued through the pilot and a little bit after the pilot, we explored with these ISOs the potential to iterate and scale Innovation Compass in part or in total. And some ISOs ran their own internal pilots with the innovators that they support using different components of Innovation Compass, and they found exciting value in integrating that into the stuff that they were doing. So we learned from them what they needed in order to be able to make use of the site's components and their own platforms and tools, and then we worked with them to deliver on those needs. And so that's why we've made the code accessible to anybody who needs it, who wants to take it, chop it up, adapt it, make use of it with attribution. So current implementation partners don't currently include the NSF, but they do include the Center on Rural Innovation, the HBCU Founders Initiative, and an organization called Cambio Labs. It's a company run by one of the members of our co-design cohort, and he was able to leverage the capital of his shared ownership of the platform from participating in co-design to leverage that enough to seek the integration of that thing into his own platform for his own venture. So now I'm just going to revisit what I said the benefits were of doing co-design: greater relevance and fit, reduced risk and rework, higher adoption and engagement, equity and inclusion, improving equity and inclusion, increased trust and relationship building, and then building the capital of the people who are participating in co-design. We definitely saw evidence, even initial evidence, of all of these in the pilot. And we're looking forward to seeing how these organizations are able to make use of the components of the site and how it continues to prove itself as a resource for developing tools to support innovators in building capital. Even if it's like the pieces of it iterate and they continue to grow, we think that there are some really strong foundations there to continue to inform future action. So I want to leave you, I want to make sure that we have a little time for Q&A too, but I want to leave you with some tips for doing co-design to build capital that were affirmed for us in doing this project. So first, collaborate in defining the types of capital that people need to thrive in the context you're focused on and how it makes sense to them to talk about it. Consider an assessment that helps people identify the types of capital that they already have and that they can leverage. Include the voices and perspectives of experts who work to cultivate the capital of that population, leverage their frameworks and theories, but you can then refine them with the people who are actually going to make use of them. Work with capitalized people who have gained sufficient capital to understand and assess what did or what could or what might have helped them in a previous stage, and then test those solutions with people who are undercapitalized, who were at that previous stage. Acknowledge and elevate co-design as a form of capital building, something that confers a lot of value to these folks. And then compound that capital building by compensating people for their time and their contribution, both of which are capital that they are offering, that they have to offer. And so acknowledging that capital with compensation. As a reminder, Innovation Compass is live. The site is up at innovationcompass.io. Jamie has shared the link in the chat. We also have a full case study page for this project, which Jamie is going to share on the case study page. You will get a full account of the project, even fuller story than the long rambling thing that I just said. There's a short video overview about what we did and what we learned. It's really easily shareable. It's, I think, under 3 minutes. There's a link to the GitHub page with the full code and the components for the website. There is also a link to buy a deck of cards, like an actual deck of cards that have all of the 40 innovator practices on them. So the innovators who prefer to do that self-assessment in an analog or a tangible way or in a group context have that option. So there's a lot of stuff on that case study page. And we want to encourage you to please share this particular set of tools and resources with any innovators that you know, or any innovator support organizations or professionals, because we are really interested in learning how people want to make use of it, or even just parts of it. Okay, Jamie, what do we have in the Q&A or from the chat, things that people are asking about?
Yes, we have one question about, the question is, how did co-design participants respond to focusing the deliverables on capability building resources instead of on specific solutions like grant making or fund making? And did we need to reframe the value of capability building at all?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think when we started the co-design process, folks had lots of concerns. Their concerns and their focus areas were on the application process. They were on that journey beforehand. And when we started to zero in with them, we said, okay, these are all important things. Where can we be most strategic right now? Where is the unique value that we can add? And they're innovators, right? They are all people who understand sort of prioritization, thinking about how to scope and focus our intention at a particular place. And so they were responsive and receptive to that. Also understanding that they were not the target audience that we were designing these interventions for. We were really thinking about past them, people who were earlier in their journeys. And I think that they were really eager to support those communities as well, having been those communities in the past and understanding what those journeys were like. So I think it was really just about framing and being really clear about who our intended focus was. And in the meantime, they were actually still able to gain a lot of value from engaging with these capital building practices themselves.
Great. We have another question about the initial project scoping, because the application redesign work already being in process. They're wondering how we decided to move upstream to work with this particular group of innovators.
Yeah, I think it was really in surveying that work. I think at the outset, we just said we were going to make this easier. And that is what we tried to do ultimately. We wanted to make it easier for undercapitalized folks. We didn't use the word undercapitalized. We wanted to make it easier for a broader range of innovators to be able to access federal seed funding. And our approach, we were agnostic to the tools that we might develop. We said that we would hinge our design intervention on what we learned in research. So it was once we learned this stuff in research and we said, oh, we think that there's this opportunity in the application process. And the NSF said, that's great. And just so you know, here's the other stuff that's happening. And we looked at that stuff and we said, we're not going to be able to make a meaningful enough complement to what is already in progress. Or we might just muddy that existing set of processes. So let's find where we can be most value added and where we can have the greatest impact that isn't already being addressed or that is gnarlier. It is harder to think about, like, how do we build people's capital instead of how do we make this application easier?
There's another question about co-design more generally, I think, and thinking about how that can be used to create coalitions of community-based organizations, if we have any experience with that.
Sorry, can you ask that one more time for me?
Yes, the question is, how can co-design be applied to creating coalitions of community-based organizations?
Yeah, okay. So I think that it's an important thing to think about what the role of, like in this case, PPL is in this process. Is our role to make a thing and you are helping us to make a thing? Or is our role to enable you, to facilitate you being like whatever group that is? Maybe that is a collective of people who are so interested, or a collective of organizations to achieve some set of goals. We have a set of tools that we're expert in, a set of tools to enable that collaboration toward shared goals. we also have a set of tools to identify what those shared goals are. So I do think that there is a lot of value, and I think it has been well practiced actually in a lot of contexts, of thinking about co-design as a way to bring together different coalitions to align on a set of shared goals and then to work collaboratively toward achieving those. So I think that is pre-exists PPL and is an existing set of strategies, but could certainly be scaled further.
Great. I think we have time for one more. And there's one that's about the question is, how could we apply, or have we thought about how we could apply a similar approach to a different community that is undercapitalized?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for us, one context that we've thought about this in is in healthcare context, thinking about healthcare providers and what sort of support they need in order to be able to address systemic barriers in providing healthcare to various types of underserved communities. But it could really be applied to a lot of different contexts in which, when we see a group of people who are trying to do a thing, and one of the obstacles is that they don't have all the capacities to do that thing, I think this is an opportunity to think about, okay, what are those capacities that they need to be successful because they want them? And then how can we help them to identify what those capacities are, whether we want to call them capitals or not? And then think about who has those and how can we identify what the tools are to self-generate those things. If you got more questions, or if that wasn't a totally satisfying answer, I want to flash this thing, which is to say, if there's a question that we didn't get to today, or if you're like, that was a weak answer, Raj, what else you got for me? Or if there is a population that you are thinking about that could use more capital to build resilience, or you've got other things you're really impressed by the way that Jamie and I have been presenting today, and you want to talk to us about something else, that's great. Email us. My email address is there. You could also email info@Public Policy Lab. We're really excited about this work. We're excited to have those conversations, and we're really grateful that you all joined today and gave up this hour to spend with us. So thanks for that. Hope you have a great rest of your day.